something like this up.
Millennials, you haven't gone through the stuff that we've gone through.
Watch it, here we go.
Yep.
There it's going.
At least 70 people are dead after a fire spread through the garment district of Bangladesh's capital, Dhaka. Victims were trapped inside the densely packed buildings, where reportedly chemicals were illegally stored. The area has a history of fires stemming from outdated safety regulations, despite the mayor's efforts to evict businesses storing chemicals from the city.
It's become clear to me that the public's confidence in the 9th District seat general election has been undermined to an extent that a new election is warranted.
North Carolina's election board ordered a new vote in the 9th congressional district after the leading candidate, Republican Mark Harris, said that would be the best way forward. In a fourth day of hearings on the disputed race, the board shared fresh evidence that Harris had been communicating with an operative accused of illegally collecting absentee ballots and telling his staff to sign them. YouTube says it's deleted more than 400 user accounts and disabled comments on tens of millions of videos in order to push pedophiles off the site. The company was reacting to a video from one user that showed how the platform's algorithm was suggesting videos featuring children, which attracted pedophiles, who were commenting below the videos to share their contact information and links to child pornography.
For whatever reason, YouTube's algorithm is glitching out to a point that nothing but these videos exist.
A federal judge has barred Roger Stone from speaking publicly about his case. Stone was called into court to defend an image he'd posted to Instagram earlier in the week, a photo of Judge Amy Berman Jackson with a crosshair in the corner. Stone attempted to argue that the image depicted a Celtic cross or an occult symbol, but Judge Jackson said, quote, "There's nothing ambiguous about crosshairs," and that if Stone violates his gag order, he'll be sent to jail.
Virginia Governor Ralph Northam is having more success than you might think, surviving the revelation that he wore blackface to dress as Michael Jackson and has a yearbook page with a photo of a Klansman and a guy in blackface. Northam continues to deny the photo is him. The once deafening calls for him to quit have mostly died down, and Northam set out on a reconciliation tour. But last night, the tour's first stop hit a major snag. Northam was supposed to come here to historically black Virginia Union University and sit quietly during a commemoration of the Richmond 34, former students who helped pioneer the sit-in movement during the Civil Rights era.
Will the students, alum, and everyone please stand with me, faculty and staff who are here. Today we have come to recognize the Richmond 34.
When some current VUU students found out Northam was planning to attend today's event, they felt blindsided. The student government wrote to Northam asking that he reschedule. Northam wasn't in the room, but the question of whether he was worthy of forgiveness was.
We stand on the message of 400 years, knowing that there will be a greater tomorrow because of our actions today.
Jamon Phoenix is the student who wrote the letter to Northam.
I think that today was a huge victory for the student body. It was a victory for the Commonwealth. It was a victory for Black Virginians.
Why delay reconciliation?
There was no real reconciliation. He was not on the. If he was to attend, he would not be on the platform, and he would not have said anything. So where was the reconciliation inside of just a presence? We want you to come, but if you're going to come, you have to answer our questions, and we have to have an honest but hurtful discussion about race and reconciliation in the Commonwealth.
In their letter to Northam, the students said that his attendance would, quote, take away from the commemoration. But some of the people being commemorated disagreed. In a letter of her own to the governor, Elizabeth Rice encouraged him to come to the event.
I was appalled when I learned that the SGA president of Virginia Union was attempting to speak for the Richmond 34. We all have sinned and made mistakes and deserve the second chance to make a positive difference in this divisive world we live in.
She was one of the 34 Virginia Union students who walked into Thalheimer's department store in Richmond on February 22, 1960. They sat down at a whites-only lunch counter and were charged with trespassing. The Supreme Court overturned their convictions 3 years later. How did you feel when the photo came out?
I was shocked. I was just outraged. I said, what? Northam may have trespassed against the Black community, but the word is forgiveness. And that's what my heart said, that he deserves forgiveness.
The students say they still want Northam to come to the school and reconcile with them, but only after he's done his homework and is ready for real dialogue. Rice sees today as a missed opportunity to get on the right path. Do you think there's a generational divide on forgiveness between you and some of the students who've spoken out?
Millennials, you haven't gone through the stuff that we've gone through. So, until you walk in my shoes and all the things that we've done and the names we've been called, and believe me, I was integrated to schools in Petersburg, Virginia, and I know they called me names, they put the racist noose on the board and told me that the KKK was gonna lynch me just for coming to teach their children.
Do you think ultimately, in order to move forward as a society, do Black people have to come to the table every time and be forgiving in order for things to move forward?
I mean, that's been our modus operandi all along. We've always been forgiving. No, I don't think we have to continually being the forgiving person, but people need to realize they need to stop being in a position where they have to be forgiven.
Police in Chicago arrested actor Jussie Smollett this morning and said he'd paid 2 Black men $3,500 to pretend to attack him and make him look like the victim of a hate crime. Last month, Smollett had claimed he'd been attacked by 2 white men who recognized him from the show Empire and put a noose around his neck, then hailed MAGA country.
This announcement today recognizes that Empire actor Jussie Smollett took advantage of the pain and anger of racism to promote his career.
Smollett now faces a felony charge for filing a false police report. His lawyers say he's innocent, and they're planning to investigate. It's a strange situation that's giving President Trump something to tweet about. A complete 180 in a story that, for a few weeks, gave liberals a talking point. From the very beginning, there were some signs that something was off. First, why would 2 homophobic, racist men be watching a show starring a gay Black man closely enough to recognize him on the street? And why were they outside at 2 a.m. during a polar vortex? And I personally never got why a Black man would leave a noose around his neck for hours and not take it off. Jussie Smollett was happy to answer these questions for the media.
Who the would make something like this up or add something to it or whatever it may be?
But for a solid 3 weeks, a lot of people have been publicly supporting Smollett via social media, in particular politicians. If you want to play to your base, one of the easiest shortcuts is to find something that other people are outraged about, and then tweet about it, saying, yes, I too am outraged. Basically, it's free woke points. You don't have to write legislation or donate money or do any of the other things that make being a politician hard work. And it's high return. You now have a track record for supporting LGBT and minority rights or anything else that you want. Politicians on both sides do this, but in this case, it was the left that really leaned into it. From newcomers like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to veterans like Nancy Pelosi, and presidential hopefuls Cory Booker and Kamala Harris. But recently, a lot of those politicians have started walking back their support for Smollett, or even deleting their tweets outright. Social media has been a powerful tool for people to put pressure on institutions like the government, the police, and even mass media. And over the past few years, politicians have started to turn that momentum into a tool for PR, which you could be cynical about. But when politicians lend their name to a cause, it helps bring attention to issues that otherwise might not get that much notice. And that does have benefits. Jussie Smollett just threw a wrench in all that. He hasn't been found guilty, but the seeds of doubt that are there have been amplified by all the public figures who jumped on the bandwagon the first chance they got. There were already people who tended to believe that anyone talking about discrimination or violence faced by women or minorities was either exaggerating, playing a victim card, or just outright lying. And it only takes one high-profile incident to add fuel to those suspicions. The right wing is going to have this in their back pocket for a long time. And because of that, people who have been victimized may worry about getting labeled a liar and be afraid to speak up, which is frustrating because according to the FBI, hate crimes are on the rise, with about 75% being motivated by race or sexual orientation. It's a point the police made themselves this morning.
My concern is that hate crimes will now publicly be met with a level of skepticism that previously didn't happen.
House Democrats plan to introduce a resolution tomorrow to end the emergency on America's southern border that President Trump declared last week.
We're going to be signing today and registering national emergency. And it's a great thing to do.
The resolution is largely symbolic, since Trump has promised to veto it. But it's an unprecedented attempt by Congress to check the president's power to declare national emergencies, an authority that, ironically, Congress itself gave him. The 1976 National Emergencies Act was originally written to limit the president's power. It hasn't worked out that way.
The National Emergencies Act doesn't even bother to define what a national emergency is. When a president declares a national emergency, it's basically like a key in a lock where he's accessing really over 100 standby statutes, authorities Congress has passed that are only available to the president during a time of national emergency.
Jimmy Carter declared the first national emergency in 1979, putting sanctions on Iran in response to the hostage crisis. Since then, we've had 59. Amazingly, 31 of those are still active, and 28, like Carter's first, involve sanctions. Of the 31, 17 seem to merit the label national emergency. They target problems that are large in scope and potential impact, or have an immediate effect on U.S. security, including nuclear nonproliferation, post 9/11 counterterrorism, international crime, and foreign interference in our elections. 4 target issues that may not immediately affect American interests, but have traditionally been important to U.S. policy, like Cuba. Then there are the other 10, which are aimed at punishing foreign actors who in no real way threaten the security of the U.S. These include declarations that sanctioned the government of Zimbabwe, punished people who interfered with the 2006 Belarusian presidential election, and sanctioned people involved with the 2015 failed coup in Burundi. Most of these declarations targeted genuinely bad behavior, but it'd be hard to argue they were really national emergencies for the United States. Congress does have the power to stop any of these at any time, but until now, it's never made a serious attempt to do so. In other words, Congress has handed over enormous authority to the president and then failed to do anything to check or even supervise him. And most rational people would call that a real national emergency.
It's awesome. We live in one of the most beautiful places on the planet. Every day I can come out here, you can get in the water, you can surf, you can do, whatever you want to do.
Watch it, here we go.
Yep.
Look at that.
There it's going.
That's quality work right there, Jill.
That's, this is around your house right now.
Yeah.
Sean Gould has lived in Imperial Beach, California for a little over a year. He's already gotten used to the scene. That's because it's caused by something called a king tide. These extreme high tides are natural. They happen once or twice a year because of a specific alignment of the sun, the earth, and moon. But they're getting worse, forcing residents to confront, or in some cases completely ignore, a problem that will soon be widespread.
But given what's going on right now, do you still think it makes sense to live here?
Yes, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, this is a dream, let's be honest. Long term, is there going to have to be some decisions made, and some of them may be being tough? Possibly. Watch your shoes, you're about to get drenched.
Unlike a lot of Southern California coastal towns, Imperial Beach is a working class community. Their entire city budget this year is $19 million.
That pales in comparison with the whopping $100 million that the projected 6 feet of sea level rise is expected to cost the city by 2100.
We're just cleaning up the sand and the cobblestones that are in the street.
Are you going to have to do this again tomorrow?
We expect to do this for the next 4 days in a row.
So what are the city's plans in terms of trying to deal with sea level rise and more frequent events like this?
So the city's assessing its public infrastructure in terms of sea level rise and what needs to move.
So you're actually thinking of moving?
Exactly. I mean, what you look behind you right here is less than 100 feet away from you is a sewer pump station that's within a flood zone. And that is a concern for us.
Has it been difficult to sort of come up with a plan for the city?
It's controversial, yeah.
Why is it controversial?
Everyone has varying opinions on it, and unfortunately, politics is coming into play here.
That's because the state of California isn't waiting around for the sea to rise. It's being proactive and forcing every city along the coast to come up with a plan. Now. So, officials in Imperial Beach commissioned a study that would offer solutions. One of those solutions introduced a term that's since become controversial: managed retreat. For city officials, this would mean eventually removing public infrastructure like seawalls and sewer pumps and seizing any private property that got too damaged to live in. But to a lot of residents, managed retreat meant the government was going to force people out of their homes, which has caused some tension, especially with local politicians like Paloma Aguirre, who was ambushed by a local resident right before we interviewed her.
Paloma, what is your intentions long-term here for 10 years? I'm a resident of Imperial Beach. You represent us. You're going with it. No, I'm just asking you a question. I represent Imperial Beach too.
Had several public workshops of which
and are you going to retreat? Are you going to do managed retreat? Are you going to remove the language of managed retreat
from...
Okay,
you asked me a question. I'm trying to answer it. You're talking over me.
Okay, go ahead.
He's had several public...
That interaction was honestly a little bit heated. Can you tell me what happened?
You know, it's something that we've seen happen here. It's happening in other towns and in coastal towns in California where there's just misinformation when it comes to using the terms managed retreat or other types of terms that have to do with adaptation to sea level rise. It's a very interesting situation that's happening socially, psychologically. When we're facing life-changing events, I think that that taps into the deepest fears of us as human beings, and everybody reacts differently.
The next day, we caught up with the resident who confronted Councilwoman Aguirre, Dante Pamintuan.
What exactly is your issue with the term managed retreat?
Managed retreat in our local plan talks about the eminent domain as a last resort. We don't surrender. We never surrender. You know, I was in the Marine Corps.
I've spoken to some scientists, and they've told me that it's going to get worse because of sea level rise. How do you feel about that?
This is nature. This is God's creation. Look at, if you want to turn the camera here, in the years past, this has always been a flooded area. And look, it's not even wet. I mean, it'll drain and everything's fine.
So you can engineer yourself out of this issue?
Absolutely. This is an engineering solution. It's not a scientific solution.
A few days after our interview with Dante, the city released an updated version of its plan, which basically retreated from managed retreat, stating that it does not consider it a viable or necessary adaptation strategy. Instead, the city will stick to its current strategy of adding sand to the beach and keeping up existing shoreline protections. Terminology aside, sea level rise in Imperial Beach is a reality. So much so that scientists from the Scripps Institute of Oceanography have taken an interest. They're using LiDAR, drones, and ocean sensors to study the effect of these extreme events on Imperial Beach, with the ultimate aim of creating a model that predicts how other coastlines might change in the future. That's something that Gabe Burr of the California Coastal Commission is very interested in.
How well are communities all along the coast in California doing in terms of coming up with the climate adaptation plan?
So it's a work in progress, and I think it's proven to be more difficult than we maybe originally assessed or thought that it would be.
Why would
just
that be?
Because there's so many different stakeholders and people involved. It's not as simple as just saying, okay, go ahead and map this, your vulnerabilities, and then come in and pick a solution that's going to work for everybody. You're dealing with a massive ocean and sea level rise and changing conditions. And the solutions aren't going to be just really easy solutions. What we're projecting aren't changes are going to happen overnight, right? And so this idea of, well, things are still the same. I don't need to change.
Right, I don't need to do anything right away.
Right, I don't see it. You're talking about the ocean rising. Well, I don't see it.
Does that worry you?
Yeah, it's a problem. And I think that's what we're trying to do, is kind of work with these local communities, because if we don't do something, we're going to end up being reactive, right? And so then you're forced into limited solutions, and some of those may not really be what's best for the coastline.
People don't like it when you mess with their homes, and Imperial Beach is no different. But residents know what's coming.
We can only ostrich in the sand for so long. There's going to have to be changes, and it's going to get worse.
So this is definitely on your mind.
It's a reality. The city stops, taking the sand out. These buildings would get knocked down. The ocean's going to win.